There was another building collapse, this time in Karachi, Pakistan, in the Lyari neighborhood. And it was a 5-story residential building that came collapsing down. So once again, we are left to sift through the rubble and try to determine what caused this collapse. And what was the deal with all of that infighting going on with the rescuers? And let's find out what really brought this building down.
This building was declared as a dangerous building, and a couple of notices were issued to the occupants of the building to vacate the building because of its dangerous structure. But unfortunately, people chose to risk their lives and they did not vacate.
Okay, so here's really the history of what happened with this. So it started in 2022 with a complaint, and then in June 2nd, 2023, there was the first ejectment notice from the Sindh Building Control Authority, that's the SPCA. And then it wasn't until February 28th, 7-8 months later, they come in and with a second notice to evacuate, because apparently not everybody left the building when they were supposed to. And they followed up with a third 3-day final warning. The date wasn't specific. But then in June 25th, 2024, virtually another year later, they send a fourth notice, this time to the utilities like K Electric, Sui Southern Gas Company, and Karachi Water and Sewerage Board to discontinue the utility services, which they failed to do, by the way. And so here we are another year later, June 2nd, 2025, just over a month ago. Remember, today's July 4th. This is when the building collapsed, July 4th, 2025. So a month ago on June 2nd, the SPCA issued an urgent reminder for ejectment to the police and to the local government commissioners. And apparently it doesn't sound like the government has a whole lot of power to go in and just tell people to get out. That's what's mind-boggling here about this. And then on June 29th, just last week, the SPCA warned residents via megaphones to evacuate immediately. So this is weird. This is weird. It almost sounds like a joke. It almost sounds like they're standing there going, and this time we mean it. So anyway, this is where it stood, and then of course it finally collapsed today. Now, and remember, this was just last week, and so the problem with that was when they went there with the bullhorns and they told everybody to get out, they were like, we're not going anywhere unless you provide us with accommodation. So apparently they're probably poor and don't have enough money to just up and move somewhere. And not only that, again, the utilities still did not respond and still did not cut off the power, the water, the gas, whatever was there. I also read a report this morning too, that a man who lived in the building with his wife and kid, okay, so he was at work. The wife calls him on the phone and says, I'm trying to get some people to leave the building because I see cracks opening up. And he goes, just get out now. Get our daughter and get out now. So they vacated the building, and 20 minutes later is when it collapsed. And there was still 40 people inside this building when it collapsed. So my question is, because we haven't seen any photographs or reports or anything yet from the government, I want to know what exactly it was they saw that says to them, hey, this building's coming down. It needs to, people need to get out of here now. Did they see cracked columns? Did they see slabs that looked like they were going to punch through? I mean, we just don't know. And I wish I could see pictures. There's no Google Street View maps that we can bring up. They have no Street View in Pakistan to speak of, really. So unless somebody posts a picture of it, we won't really ever know. But you know what? There's a twist here, folks. And this is actually quite impressive, because this is the very first time I've seen a government agency come out and say, hey, this is our fault. We're to blame. This is on us. So the Sindh Minister for Local Government, Syed Ghani, had a press conference. And at this press conference, I was very surprised and very impressed to see him say, had there been cooperation, these 7 lives could have been saved. Now, of course, the toll is higher now. Last report I read, it was 17. And it might even increase more as they dig up the rubble and they may find additional under there. He also pointed the fingers right back at themselves. He said that officials from the Sindh Building Control Authority were complicit in illegal construction activities. He said, look, SPCA officers are involved. He says there is gross negligence, illegal buildings are being improved, and constructed, and our own people are part of the problem. I was like, whoa, I've never seen such honesty and transparency like that from a government official before. He said there was a deeply entrenched culture of corruption within Karachi's construction sector. And he also criticized the K Electric, that was the company I told you about earlier, for enabling such illegal structures by providing them with electricity connections and everything, even though they told them not to do it. They told them to disconnect the power, and they still kept the power going anyway to these buildings that were dilapidated and basically condemned and ordered to evacuate, and they didn't. So in my opinion, this probably helped people stay in the building that didn't want to leave, because it didn't give them any incentive to leave. If you cut the power, how many people are going to stay very long? So they're coming up with new sweeping reforms now to the building and construction laws aimed at strengthening their oversight and giving them more control. Like when they come in and tell people to leave, they better leave. And this is what blows my mind, is why didn't these people leave? Here in the United States, as I showed you on my near building collapse in that Clearwater, Florida condo a couple of months ago. Remember, I showed you how many police and fire engines showed up, and the city came in with the stickers and condemned the building, and the cops told everybody, look, you got a couple of hours to go in and get all your stuff, your most valuable stuff, and get out. That's what we do in the U.S. When the city puts that condemned sticker on the building, we're gone. We're all out of there. This happens all of the time. Why these folks didn't leave is still beyond me. And this is really interesting too. Sayed also said that he warned all of his friends who were investors in the real estate space not to buy or invest in any of these buildings, because he said action will be taken even against those who finance them as well. And you know what? You don't want to buy a building like that and have it collapse, and then you're known as that landlord. Your face is going to be pasted all over the internet when your building collapses. You're going to be that guy. Now, if you saw my video on the Jet Set nightclub collapse down in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic, you know that the owner there, Antonio Espaillat, he was arrested, and he's now basically public enemy number one. So back in Pakistan, friends and real estate investors that he was talking to, he's trying to help them avoid a situation like this. So this is probably our biggest clue so far as to what really happened here. You got a resident of the building who saw cracks in one of the pillars around 9 a.m. in the morning. And it wasn't too long after that, of course, the building collapsed all the way down to that rubble pile that you're about to see here. In here you can see that the once 5-story building was reduced in size to about a 2-story tall pile of rubble and debris. Now, this is the crack that was found in a single column at the bottom of that Clearwater condo that I showed you earlier on. And it's a shame because, this evacuated the entire building. And why the people in Pakistan did not do the same thing. At least some of them saw the crack and were able to escape. Then here you can see this TikToker, UserNoman24, they got some pretty detailed overhead view looking down, almost like a drone's view. You can see some pretty good details of what's going on there. So right where the machinery is at the bottom of the screen was likely the front of the building. And if you look closely, you can see columns that were just laying across the rubble. So it looks like most of the columns were, somewhat intact. So this leads me to believe that maybe those cracks they saw were on some of the columns on maybe the first floor that were buckling under the stress of the load above them. And then this incident just keeps getting more and more bizarre. Look at this, a fight breaks out amongst the rescuers. I don't know what they were arguing over, but they seem to have a hard time coming to grips with, they need to stay focused on the task at hand, which is rescuing potential victims that are caught in the rubble. And now this entire group here looks like they're fighting amongst themselves, and they have to keep breaking up more fights, and then more fights start up. So meanwhile, precious minutes tick by, and God knows who's still in the rubble begging to be saved while these guys sort out their issues. And so we're left wondering if the fight's ever going to break up, but then it looks like some police officers finally show up, and they calm everybody down and separate them. And I think we're going to see some guy being escorted away who has a bloody nose. So it looks like officials have finally calmed this situation down. And it's this guy at the bottom of the screen with the mustache right there. You can see he's got a bloody nose. So they escorted him away, and so we don't know what the deal is there. But usually we're accustomed to seeing a whole lot of unity in people during a rescue mission like this. So you remember I mentioned earlier that Syed Ghani had admitted that the government has a role of responsibility in this. And he also mentioned that in the city of Karachi, there's 588 buildings that they have identified that need to be condemned. And of those buildings, 107 of them are in this very Lyari neighborhood where this collapse occurred. Seems to be a way of life in Pakistan, where every collapse there's promises of changes, but nothing ever happens. So this one here is from July 2017. It's a 3-story collapse in Liaquatabad. And then in February 2019, they had another collapse of a 4-story unit, as you can see there in the background. And dozens were rescued from the rubble of that particular collapse. One of the worst ones occurred in March 2020, where there was a major structure failure, where they had 50 injuries, and they lost 27. And then in September 2020, they had 2 other collapses, and one of them was a house that was actually under construction. And then, of course, there was another one here. This one is from October of 2023. And a collapse of a building under construction. Right, so looking at the rubble pile, it just looks to me like you can see where all of the rebar rods are. The concrete was just stripped pretty clean off most of it. You see very little areas where concrete is actually stuck to the rebar. I mean, all over the place, it just came off clean. And here, unfortunately, you can see that the equipment has already removed a lot of the debris that would have showed us maybe some of the columns down on the lower level here. This is a 5-story building, so we assume this is the 5th floor, the 4th floor here, the 3rd here, and the 2nd floor is probably just crushed right in here somewhere. So this area is where the 2nd floor was. So it looks like most of the strength of the building was in the back because it's piled high. So that means the roof area, this area here, did not come all the way down. So there's pockets of rooms underneath this rubble pile here that are still reasonably intact. And this is likely where they're going to find your survivors in this area. Here they're digging all the way through the debris and they're making it to the back where it's elevated somewhat, and they have those pockets of those rooms that are there, and they can probably rescue more people back in there. And this photo here, which was probably taken fairly early in the digging process, you can see many of the columns right over here, right here, and right here. And so they look reasonably intact. These were probably on the 2nd floor columns going to the 1st floor because it's so close to the front of the building here. It was probably a matter of 1 or 2 of these likely developed some cracks and then couldn't take the load any longer. And then this shows once they've, of course, dug through most of that lower debris and worked their way towards the back, where I said that it was a lot more stable back in there, you can actually see whole rooms where they likely found survivors in these areas. So it appears that there just seems to be a lot of blame to go around from everybody from the SPCA to the utility companies and even to the people who were foolish that stayed behind. This reminds me of those people in the Poseidon adventure that said, no, we're going to go the other way. We're not going to follow Gene Hackman out to safety. We're going to go the other way, the dangerous route. Maybe some sort of provisions should have been made, but at least 20 families remained behind in that building. Now, if you haven't seen my latest video that I uploaded on the Champlain Towers condo collapse, make sure you check that one out here. That probably has the most information so far from the government that shows where their investigation is going and what the root cause is going to be. Then make sure you check out my other video here on the Jet Set nightclub collapse that I did back in April of 2025. That was an incredibly detailed video showing all sorts of issues with that building and what caused that collapse. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see all of you on the next one.